The sun cast a golden glow over the city, painting the streets with a festive warmth. It was that time of the year when homes twinkled with fairy lights, Christmas trees stood proudly in living rooms, and laughter filled the air. Children ran around with excitement, eagerly counting down the days until Christmas morning. But for Michael Adams, Christmas was not just about decorations and gifts. It was about tradition. Every December, Michael, his wife Elizabeth, and their 3 children, David, Emma, and Noah, traveled to their hometown for the Christmas celebration. It was a ritual they had followed for years, a time to reunite with extended family, share stories, and enjoy the festive season. But there was one thing that always stood between Michael and his wife: prayer. Elizabeth was a woman of deep faith. She believed in the power of prayer and never started or ended her day without speaking to God. She prayed over her children, her husband, and their home. But Michael was different. He was a practical man, one who believed that hard work and common sense were what truly mattered in life. To him, prayer was nothing but a waste of time. Whenever Elizabeth gathered the children for morning prayers, Michael would scoff. "Why do you keep bothering them with all this? Let them enjoy their morning," he would say, rolling his eyes. But Elizabeth never wavered. Even when Michael made it difficult, she continued to teach their children the importance of faith. One evening, just a few days before Christmas, Elizabeth was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The rich aroma of fried chicken and jollof rice filled the house, making the children eagerly peek into the kitchen to see if the food was ready. Michael sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Michael," Elizabeth called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come join us for prayer before dinner." Michael let out a sigh. "Elizabeth, we go through this every day. You pray, I don't. Can't we just eat?" Elizabeth frowned but remained calm. "Just once, Michael. It wouldn't hurt." Michael shook his head. "You pray for all of us, isn't that enough?" David, their eldest son, looked between his parents and muttered, "Maybe Dad is right, Mom. We pray all the time." Elizabeth's heart ached. She could see how Michael's attitude was influencing the children. But she said nothing. Instead, she bowed her head and started praying, while Michael sat with his arms crossed, impatiently waiting for the prayer to end. That night, Elizabeth had a dream. In the dream, she saw their family traveling to the village as usual. They were on the road, laughing and enjoying the journey. But suddenly, a thick darkness covered the road, and she heard the sound of loud wailing. She saw broken glass, overturned cars, and lifeless bodies scattered on the ground. Elizabeth woke up with a start, her heart pounding. She was sweating even though the room was cool. She turned to Michael, who was fast asleep, and shook him awake. "Michael, wake up!" Michael groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Elizabeth, what is it?" "I had a dream. A terrible dream." Her voice was trembling. "I saw an accident. Felt so real. I think we should reconsider our trip." Michael sighed heavily and lay back down. "Elizabeth, it's just a dream. Stop worrying about things that aren't real." "But Michael, I feel like this is a warning from God. Maybe we should delay our trip." Michael turned to her with an irritated look. "Listen, we've traveled every Christmas for years. We're going." End of discussion. Elizabeth wanted to argue, but she knew her husband well. Once he made up his mind, there was no changing it. She turned to God instead. "Lord, please protect my family. Keep us safe from whatever danger lies ahead." As she drifted back to sleep, she had no idea how soon her prayers would be tested. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the bedroom. Elizabeth turned on her side and looked at Michael, who was still fast asleep. The weight of the dream she had last night still sat heavily on her chest. She had prayed about it, but a deep uneasiness refused to leave her. She took a deep breath and got out of bed. The smell of Christmas filled the house. The sweet scent of cinnamon, fresh-baked bread, and roasted chicken wafted from the kitchen, where she had prepared some meals ahead of their trip. The children, David, Emma, and Noah, were already up, watching cartoons in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. Michael soon woke up, stretching and yawning as he walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," he said casually, reaching for a glass of water. Elizabeth hesitated, then spoke. "Michael, about last night. I really think we should stay back this Christmas." Michael placed the glass on the counter and rubbed his temples. "Elizabeth, not this again." "Michael, please listen," she pleaded. "I'm not asking us to cancel completely. Just delay the trip for a day or two. I can't shake off the feeling that something is wrong." Michael let out a frustrated sigh. "Elizabeth, it was just a dream. Do you know how many times people have dreams that never come to pass?" "But some do," she countered, her voice firm. "What if this is one of those dreams?" Michael rolled his eyes. "You're being paranoid. You always think prayer solves everything. Well, guess what? We have planned this trip for months. The kids are excited. I am not ruining Christmas because of a bad dream." Elizabeth clenched her fists but held back her words. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything. So she did the only thing she could. She prayed. "Lord, I have done my part. I have warned him. Please keep us safe." The morning of Christmas Eve was a busy one. The car was packed with suitcases, gift boxes, and homemade treats for the family members waiting in the village. David, Emma, and Noah were buzzing with excitement. "Mom, I can't wait to see Grandpa," Emma beamed. "And eat all the village food," Noah added, licking his lips. Elizabeth forced a smile. Deep inside, she still felt uneasy. Michael slammed the trunk shut. "All right, everyone, get in. We have a long journey ahead." The family got into the car, and Michael turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and they pulled out of the driveway. They had barely driven 20 minutes when the car suddenly sputtered and jerked. Michael frowned and pressed on the accelerator, but the car stalled in the middle of the road. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly what she feared. He turned to Michael. "This is a sign. We should turn back." Michael shot her an annoyed look. "Elizabeth, it's just a car problem, not a prophecy." David leaned forward from the back seat. "Dad, what happened to the car?" Michael exhaled sharply. "I don't know. Probably the fuel pump or something." Cars honked behind them as Michael stepped out to check under the hood. After several failed attempts to restart the car, he kicked the tire in frustration. "This is just great," he grumbled. Elizabeth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Michael, let's take this as a warning and stay back." Michael groaned. "Elizabeth, please. The car breaking down has nothing to do with your dream." After a moment he sighed. "You know what? We'll take a commercial bus instead." Elizabeth's stomach turned. "But..." "No buts, Elizabeth," Michael snapped. "We are traveling today, and that's final." David, Emma, and Noah exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen their father this upset. Elizabeth wanted to protest, but she knew it would only cause more tension. Instead, she whispered a silent prayer. "Lord, if this journey is dangerous, please stop us. But if we must go, protect us." While the Adams family struggled with their car trouble, Uncle Richard sat in his dimly lit hut in the village. His face was twisted with envy as he listened to the whispers of the witch doctor sitting before him. Richard was Michael's uncle, but instead of being happy for his nephew's success, He was filled with hatred. "Why should Michael have everything while my own children struggle?" he spat. Michael had built a successful business, owned a beautiful home in the city, and had a happy family. Meanwhile, Richard's children had dropped out of school, and his farmland was failing. "This Christmas they will not see the new year," Richard growled. The witch doctor nodded. "It is done. Once they enter the village, disaster will strike." Richard smirked. "Good. Let him feel what it's like to suffer." Back in the city, the Addams family was now on their way in a commercial bus. Michael sat next to Elizabeth, still fuming from their earlier argument. David, Emma, and Noah sat behind them, chatting excitedly about all the fun things they would do once they arrived at the village. Elizabeth closed her eyes and prayed silently. "Lord, I don't know what lies ahead, but I put my family in your hands. No evil shall come near us." Michael scoffed under his breath. "Always praying," he muttered. Elizabeth ignored him. The bus rolled down the highway, carrying them toward their destiny, unaware that danger lurked just ahead. The bus hummed along the highway, carrying its passengers toward their destinations. Inside, laughter and chatter filled the air as people exchanged stories about their Christmas plans. Vendors leaned into the open windows at every stop, selling roasted corn, ground nuts, and bottled drinks. Michael sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window. His mood was still sour from the morning's events. He had been looking forward to driving his family to the village in their car, but now, here they were, packed inside a commercial bus like ordinary travelers. Elizabeth, on the other hand, sat with her hands clasped, whispering another prayer. She didn't care that Michael was annoyed or that some passengers occasionally threw her disapproving glances. She had learned to ignore such things. The children, David, Emma, and Noah, were seated behind them, excitedly pointing at the passing scenery. "Look at that big river," Noah exclaimed, pressing his small hands against the window. "Wow, it's so wide," Emma added, her eyes twinkling with amazement. David, the eldest, smiled but remained quiet. He had sensed the tension between their parents earlier, and something about it made him uneasy. He had also overheard his mother praying under her breath, and that only deepened the strange feeling in his chest. He leaned closer to Elizabeth. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly. Elizabeth turned to him and smiled. "I am, my son. Just keep praying in your heart, all right?" David nodded, but his worry did not fade. A few miles ahead, a thick fog began to gather. The once clear road became misty, and the trees that lined the highway looked like dark shadows stretching into the sky. The driver, a middle-aged man named Mr. Felix, turned on the headlights and gripped the steering wheel tighter. "This fog came out of nowhere," he muttered to his assistant, a young man named Chinidu. "It's strange," Chinidu agreed. "It wasn't here a few minutes ago." Elizabeth's eyes flickered open as she felt a sudden chill. Something wasn't right. He turned to Michael. "Michael, tell the driver to slow down." Michael scoffed. "Elizabeth, stop this. Do you want to control the bus too? Please just tell him." Michael sighed and leaned forward. "Driver, maybe you should reduce your speed. The road is barely visible." Mr. Felix nodded. "I was about to do that, sir." Elizabeth let out a breath, relieved that the driver had listened. But even as the bus slowed, a dark force was already at work. Back in the village, Richard sat outside his compound, staring into the fire before him. He had been restless all day, waiting for news. The witch doctor had told him that once the Addams family entered the village, the spell would activate, causing a fatal accident. But something was delaying it. Richard frowned. "Why haven't they arrived yet?" he muttered. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it whispers only he could hear. They are close, but a force is protecting them. Richard gritted his teeth. It must be that woman, he spat, referring to Elizabeth. She prays too much. He grabbed a small calabash filled with dark liquid and chanted incantations. The wind grew stronger, and the fire before him flared. Far away on the highway, the bus jerked violently. Passengers screamed as Mr. Felix struggled to keep control. Elizabeth grabbed Michael's arm. "Michael, pray. Something is wrong." Michael was too shocked to respond. David held on to his siblings, fear gripping his heart. "Mom!" Emma screamed. Elizabeth squeezed her eyes shut. "Jesus, take control." Up ahead, a large trailer was speeding toward them, its driver seemingly unaware of their presence. Mr. Felix slammed the brakes, but the bus skidded dangerously across the wet road. "Hold on," he shouted. Everything happened in seconds. The trailer collided with the bus, sending it spinning off the road. Metal twisted, glass shattered, and bodies were flung from their seats. Screams filled the air. In darkness, the first thing Elizabeth heard was the distant wail of sirens. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move, pain shot through her side. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The bus was a mangled wreck. Blood stained the seats. Bodies lay still, some covered with torn clothing, others lifeless. "Michael!" she called weakly. Silence. "David." "Emma." "Noah." A small voice whimpered nearby. Elizabeth turned her head and saw Noah curled up under a seat, his face smeared with dust and tears. "Mommy!" he sobbed. She reached for him, ignoring the pain in her body. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." David and Emma were next to each other, unconscious but breathing. Relief flooded her. They were alive. Then she saw Michael. He lay motionless, blood seeping from a deep wound on his forehead. "Michael!" Elizabeth cried, crawling toward him. She touched his face, shaking him slightly. His chest rose and fell faintly. "He's alive." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you." The sound of approaching voices and flashing emergency lights signaled the arrival of help. As Elizabeth clutched Noah, she whispered, "Lord, you saved us. Even when we did not listen, you saved us. Thank you." She glanced at Michael, whose face was still, yet peaceful. Little did she know, this accident would change him forever. Michael drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind trapped in a hazy fog between sleep and wakefulness. Distant voices echoed around him, some familiar, some unfamiliar. The beeping of machines filled the air, steady and rhythmic, like a countdown of his existence. His body felt heavy, as if he were trapped under a mountain of bricks. A dull, throbbing pain coursed through his limbs, intensifying every time he tried to shift. His eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, resisting every attempt to open them. A scent, sterile, sharp, and unmistakable, filled his nostrils. The realization sent a wave of panic through him. He tried to remember what had happened, but his mind was sluggish, refusing to piece things together. Then he heard it. Soft voice. Familiar voice. "Elizabeth." "Michael." Her voice wavered, thick with emotion. It sounded like she had been crying. He forced his eyes open, blinking against the blinding white lights above him. "Michael!" Elizabeth gasped, squeezing his hand. Slowly, his vision adjusted. He saw her face, pale, tired, but filled with relief. Her dark circles told him she hadn't slept in days. His eyes moved past her, scanning the room. Machines surrounded him, tubes attached to his arms, and bandages wrapped tightly around his body. "You're awake," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Michael parted his lips, but no words came out. His throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse quickly moved to his side, offering him a cup of water with a straw. He sipped it, wincing as the cool liquid soothed his dry throat. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse. Elizabeth wiped her tears. "The hospital, Michael. You've been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days. His breath caught. His mind frantically searched for answers. Then, like a tidal wave, the memories came crashing back. Buzz, the rain, tires skidding, the screams, the impact. His chest tightened. "The accident," he whispered. "We had an accident." Elizabeth nodded, her hands trembling. "Yes." His heart pounded against his ribs. "The kids. They're safe," she reassured him quickly. "David, Emma, and Noah are fine. They had a few cuts and bruises, but nothing serious." Michael exhaled shakily, relief washing over him. "And me." Elizabeth swallowed hard, glancing at the doctor who had just walked in. The middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes gave a small nod. "You suffered multiple injuries," the doctor said gently. "A fractured leg, 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and severe bruising. But you're lucky, Michael. Very lucky." Lucky. He didn't feel lucky. He felt broken. Michael tried to move his leg but groaned in pain. He looked at Elizabeth, confusion in his eyes. "Why did we survive?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth's lips trembled. "I prayed, Michael." He stared at her. "I prayed before we left," she continued. "I prayed in the bus. Even when you were murmuring, even when the other passengers were irritated, I still prayed." Her voice cracked. "And God saved us." Michael's throat tightened. He remembered it now, how he had rolled his eyes, how he had scoffed at her prayers. He had mocked her devotion, yet here he was, alive. Tears burned his eyes. He had spent years rejecting the idea of prayer, calling it foolishness, calling Elizabeth's faith a waste of time. But now, he couldn't ignore what had happened. He was alive. His children were alive. Elizabeth was alive. And yet, so many others weren't. Guilt gnawed at his chest. He had spent his whole life controlling everything, believing that hard work alone determined success, that he alone controlled his fate. But in that moment, he realized how powerless he had been in that bus. His life had been in God's hands all along. His fingers tightened around Elizabeth's hand. "I should have listened," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I should have prayed with you." Elizabeth's eyes welled up again, but she smiled through her tears. "You're alive, Michael. Maybe this is your second chance." Michael closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. Second chance. For the first time in years, he whispered something he had almost forgotten how to say. "Thank you, God." Michael sat in the hospital room, staring out of the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He had spent 2 weeks in this hospital bed, recovering from his injuries, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight on his heart. He had seen the news. The accident had been all over the media. Everyone in the bus had died, except his family and 2 other passengers. The images haunted him. The mangled wreckage, the faces of those who didn't make it, the lives lost in a moment. His uncle's voice played in his mind, the man who had always envied him. Michael hadn't wanted to believe that people could go to such lengths out of jealousy, But after everything Elizabeth told him, he knew the truth. His uncle had plotted his death, but God had spared him. He turned to Elizabeth, who was sitting beside him, peeling an orange for him. She had barely left his side since he woke up, tending to him with unwavering love. Their children had gone home with Elizabeth's sister, but they visited every day, their laughter filling the cold hospital room with warmth. Michael cleared his throat. "Elizabeth." She looked up. "Yes." He hesitated. The words in his heart felt foreign to him, yet they were truer than anything he had ever said. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Elizabeth paused, then put down the orange. "For what?" "For everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For all the times I mocked you for stopping the kids from praying, for thinking I could do everything on my own." His hands trembled. "I was wrong, Elizabeth." Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I should have listened to you. I should have trusted God. If you hadn't prayed that day, if you hadn't been persistent, we wouldn't be here." He swallowed hard. "I owe you my life." Elizabeth took his hand in hers. "You don't owe me anything, Michael. This was God's doing." Michael closed his eyes, trying to hold back his own tears. He had spent years rejecting the idea of faith, believing that only what he could see and control mattered. But now he had seen the power of prayer firsthand. When the doctor finally discharged him, his family stood by his side as he took his first painful steps with crutches. The injuries had weakened him, but something inside him felt stronger than ever. The drive home was quiet. Michael watched his children in the back seat, their innocent faces free of worry. They had no idea how close they had come to losing their father. When they arrived home, Elizabeth helped him inside, guiding him carefully to the couch. The living room felt different, warmer, safer. Elizabeth excused herself to the kitchen, and Michael sat there for a long time, deep in thought. Then, for the first time in years, he picked up the family Bible. It was the same Bible Elizabeth had begged him to read before, the one he always pushed aside. He ran his fingers over the cover, then slowly opened it. The words felt different now, alive. When Elizabeth returned, she stopped in her tracks, staring at him in shock. Michael looked up. "Teach me how to pray." Her hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. And there, in the middle of their living room, Michael prayed for the first time. Not because he was desperate, not because he was afraid, but because he finally believed. A full year had passed since the accident. Michael was completely healed, stronger than before. But the biggest change was in his heart. He was no longer the same man. He prayed with his family every morning. He led his children in devotion every evening. He went to church not because Elizabeth forced him, but because he wanted to. And most importantly, he forgave his uncle. Michael had struggled with it at first, knowing the man had wanted him dead. But he remembered what the Bible said about forgiveness. He refused to let bitterness consume him. He let God handle it. One day, he traveled to the village and stood face to face with his uncle. The man had aged terribly, his face filled with regret. He couldn't believe Michael was alive. "I know what you did," Michael told him. "But I forgive you." His uncle fell to his knees, trembling. He had spent months tormented by guilt, and Michael's forgiveness broke him. That day, something remarkable happened. His uncle gave his life to Christ. Even the greatest enemy couldn't stop God's plan. Michael left the village at peace, knowing that everything had happened for a reason.
This story teaches us that prayer is powerful. Even when others mock you, never stop praying. God protects His own. No evil plan can destroy what God has already blessed. Forgiveness brings peace. Even when people hurt you, choosing to forgive frees you from bitterness. It's never too late to change. Michael went from doubting God to leading his family in faith. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more inspiring stories. Like, share, and leave a comment below.